Hey podcaster, I'm Tim Wahlberg, your podcast performance coach, with another actionable tip so you can sound like a pro and gain more podcast fans. Today's tip is proceed with caution. When looking at your iTunes podcast analytics, if you haven't already checked out this feature on iTunes, do it, but do it with caution. The link is podcastsconnect.apple.com. I'll put a link to it in my show notes so you can check it out there. If you didn't know, in December of 2017, Apple launched iTunes Podcast Analytics, a tool that tracks listener behavior and data. Now, this is still very much in its early stages. At the moment of this here, episode number 46 of my podcast, Just the Tip, the data is limited to iOS 11 devices only. So it really just gives you a fraction of your listeners' habits. So that's the first thing you have to know. But hey, look, this is still awesome. Getting a glimpse is better than nothing. And when you get in there, there's a lot of stats you can look at. But the one that I find the most valuable is when your listener stops listening. You can actually see this in these analytics, and you can scroll and listen to that very moment of each episode to hear what happened when those listeners decided to stop listening. It's awesome. This is huge. However, this can also be very dangerous. My advice, approach with curiosity. Look for patterns or trends. This is insight to your listeners' behavior when listening to your podcast. This is what I found when I logged into my podcast, Just the Tip. Most people listen to this show all the way through. Now, remember, this is only 4 to 5 minutes long. That's the length of my episodes. But a few listeners stop listening right when they hear this. Hold it. Okay, I'm not going anywhere. Stay here. Now, normally, you would hear that music when I'm about to wrap up my show. It's also when I throw in my call to action. So, for a few of you who bail when you hear the music, you might not even know that I do podcast editing. Yes, you can gain years of your life back by letting me take over your editing. And I actually enjoy it. I'm fast and I'm really good at it. I've only been doing it for about 25 years or so. So if you want to find out a little bit more, including customized editing packages, just click on editing at podcastperformancecoach.com. So seeing your podcast analytics and noticing the behavior of your listener might make you actually want to tweak your show a little bit. But be careful. And the reason I'm saying this is this sort of listener data has been around in the radio industry for a long time, and it can really determine the great radio programmers from the bad ones. Good programmers use this information with other data to make long-term or big-picture decisions about programming, tweaking along the way. Bad programmers overreact and make changes to their station like every day, depending on what their listeners are doing. Here's my advice. It's perfectly reasonable to want to make some adjustments to your show. But if you're going to make some changes, you don't have to do it all at once. And you shouldn't. Make one change. Maybe it'll work. But keep in mind, you've now made a change to your show based on a fraction of your listeners. These are only listeners on Apple devices and only running iOS 11. You might be making changes for only 6 listeners rather than your 600 or 6,000 listeners that you've got. Who knows? People could stop listening because dinner is ready, or they've reached their destination, or you actually stink. When you look at this data, watch for trends over 10 or 12 episodes. If you're seeing major drop-offs every time you do your super lightning round of questions that you ask every guest, every single episode at the very same time, then reconsider the timing of that segment or ditch it altogether. Time to change things up. So again, don't become obsessed with this new tool. Use it for insight or you'll drive yourself crazy. You don't want to completely blindside your listener with a different sounding show every episode. They're your listener for a reason, remember? They like what you've been doing so far. So keep them happy. Keep doing what you've been doing for the most part. As one of my old radio program directors used to say, if it ain't broke, innovate it. Once you become predictable, you become boring. And I hope that's just the tip you might find useful. who's sticking around. Still listening. Good for you. Right to the end of the show. That's what I love to hear. Now, so much for analytics. Here you are. Still listening all the way to the end. Maybe it's the music you like. Listen to these guys jam. For more 5-minute podcasting tips and all of my services like coaching and editing, visit podcastperformancecoach.com. I'm Tim Olberg. See ya!